Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Janai and this is Karmic Fixer Tarot. And this evening we are continuing our Jungian deck study, the Jungian Tarot Deck by Robert Wang. And tonight we are focusing on the Wheel of Fortune. Let's take a moment to observe this card. If you're familiar at all with tarot, maybe you're familiar with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and you've probably already noticed some major differences in this card off the bat. We'll get into those differences in a moment. And these are the companion books that I'm using. There's the Jungian Tarot and its archetypal imagery, and there is the Tarot Psychology book, both of which are written by Robert Wang, the designer, the artist of this deck. And I think those are very helpful tools or helpful companion works to go along with this particular deck. You can take a look there. And I have my guidebook, which I'll take a look at. And just to give a quick overview of the Wheel of Fortune, in this deck, it's known as the Archetype of the Mother as Fortuna, Destiny, Fate, Bonanza, Opportunity, Increase of Wealth, Optimism, Order, and Generosity. It's a love of beauty, great expansiveness, and creativity. And in this deck, there's also the association with law, religion, and education. And now we can take a look at both of the fortune cards, the Jungian fortune card and the very familiar Rider-Waite-Smith fortune card. Now, you don't necessarily have to compare cards from different decks, I guess, as you're studying a deck, but I think it's interesting to note some of the differences, to compare and contrast both of the cards. And at this moment, I am setting a timer for about 5 minutes. I'm going to allow myself 5 minutes to explore the card, to take a look, and just take in the different imagery, and just see what I can see about the card. Just notice what jumps out at me, maybe in comparison again to other Wheel of Fortune cards you might be familiar with, or just to take it in as an image or as a card in and of itself. Of course, the major thing that sticks out for me in the Wheel of Fortune card is the wheel, and it's quite different to other Wheel of Fortune cards that I've seen, because we have a multifaceted, multicolored wheel, and we have a male figure at the center of the wheel. And it might be a good moment to maybe observe the wheel itself or the central figure and see what those might mean to you, or see how they might jog your imagination. What could they possibly mean? So we have the wheel itself, we have the eyes around the wheel, and of course we have Lady Fortuna, holding the wheel rather. And it's quite fascinating. You can maybe take a moment to maybe just imagine how she's maneuvering the wheel, why the representation of fortune is of a lady. What could that represent? Now, as I kind of spoke to a little bit in reading the guidebook, in the Jungian deck, this card is one of the mother archetypes. If you've been following this series, you'll know that the major arcana cards, particularly in the Jungian deck, tend to be representative of a familial archetype. And we've had the father archetype, the mother, the son, and the daughter. And in this case, again, we are represented by the mother. And in fortune, we have the mother as Fortuna, but also the mother who guides experience. Or rather, let me find the quote here. I am again going to try to refer to notes as closely as I can. So I do tend to go off on tangents, which I try not to do, but it happens. This is a this deck I've really been enjoying doing the deck study, and I hope that you've been getting something out of it also. Studying this deck in depth has helped me to understand this deck a lot better. Um, it's helped me to understand the imagery because normally, when I work with this deck, before I really started getting into studying it, I was interpreting it pretty much the same way that I would any other tarot deck, and maybe not necessarily paying as much attention to the imagery because of the association that I would give it with just the standard tarot. And generally, those interpretations tend to be the same. Again, the standard interpretation for the fortune card, as you might be aware, represents cycles, represents destiny, and positive changes that are beyond your control. They can represent luck, things like that. And when you think about the Wheel of Fortune card, the astrological association, the planetary association, tends to be Jupiter. And Jupiter is a planet of luck and of expansion. And the shadow side of that could also be complacency, sort of things that come naturally to the point where we might take them for granted, or maybe an over reliance on luck in some instances, or just the downturn of luck. Maybe fortune isn't quite smiling on you sometimes. And yeah, that's one thing keep in mind with this particular card. And I think that's a good interpretation for the fortune card, no matter what deck you're using. But I'm always curious as to how the imagery of this particular deck feeds back into Jungian psychology. I can't say that I'm an expert on Jungian psychology, but it is something that I'm studying and that I've developed an interest in, and that fed my interest in getting this particular deck. So, just kind of talking it out a little bit. But I think the 5 minutes that I would normally take to just observe the card are winding down. Usually, after about 5 minutes of just kind of taking in the imagery, drinking in the card, um, I'll set another timer for about 15 minutes. And from there, I'll just try and create an inner landscape. I'll try and use my imagination to interact with the card. If there's a particular if there's a particular element of the card that I find fascinating or that I'm interested in delving into, maybe imagine myself interacting with, say, in this case, the turning of the wheel, or with, Lady Fortune herself. So at this point, I will cut away to the image of the card, and this is usually the part where, I might give some insight into what I've been learning about the card from the source material. If that's going to be too distracting for you as you get to know the card, as you're interacting with the card and being imaginative with it on your own, now would be a good time for you to go ahead and mute me. And I'm going to refer to my notes and just kind of explore what I've been learning about this particular card. I think the first thing I will do is I'll go into what some of the key images of this particular card seem to represent. And if there's time, based on, I guess, my going on and whatnot, we can explore a little bit more of the history behind certain archetypes and certain themes, etc. So if we're starting with the maternal figure, the woman in the card, Lady Fortune, or in this deck, um, the lady represents the mother who determines experience. Um, and she is standing behind the wheel, kind of directing the rotation of the wheel, which I find to be really interesting. One thing that I was curious about, one thing that um, lit up my imagination was how exactly that wheel turns, what the spinning of that wheel might look like or feel like. Is it spinning very, very fast? Is Lady Fortune swing turning the wheel with broad swipes, broad strokes? Is she maneuvering the wheel. Maybe I imagined her maybe blowing on the wheel, or perhaps she's not maneuvering it at all in any perceptible way. And it also made me think about just kind of gravity. It made me think about what it feels like to say spin around and around. Like if you're outside, I did this a lot as a kid, spinning around and around and around. And then when you stop, it's when you get dizzy and when the rotation, around you is perceptible. But, you know, just going around, just going about our daily business, standing still and, we don't necessarily perceive you know, the earth spinning that we're standing on. So part of me wonders maybe the perception of the wheel fortune, maybe the way it spins, maybe it's imperceptible. And that's one thing that fired up my imagination, just kind of thinking about the way the wheel rotates, the way that it spins. And how would you imagine, the Lady Fortune, the mother, how would you imagine her rotating the wheel? And that might be something to dwell on, or that might be a way to engage with the card, engage your imagination, how it is that she's controlling the wheel. And the next element is the sun in the center of the card. The male figure in the center of the card um, seems to be a representation of original man. And that's an archetype that we explored in a few other cards, our previous our previous cards rather. Most notably, the original man is a figure that shows up in the lover card. That's where it's most prominent. And the original man, kind of like a figure similar to, say, the first man or Adam, if we're going with Judeo Christian um, symbolism. And that's prevalent in this particular deck. But the original man is the archetype of the sun. If we're thinking of the familial archetypes represented in this deck in the major arcana, we have the sun. So in this particular card, the sun is at the center of that wheel. And it kind of makes you wonder the significance of the sun being at the center of the wheel. And we have the sun with arms and legs extended. And based on the source material, that imagery kind of calls back to Leonardo da Vinci's design of a man, the Vitruvian Man image that's very familiar. Um, so in your observation of this card, you might see some parallels between the original man in the center of the wheel and the Vitruvian Man, a la Leonardo da Vinci. And if we're continuing to look at the wheel, we'll also notice the colors behind the sun, the colors of the wheel rather. And the sun is at the center, and we see the colors. We see them divided into 12 equal parts, 12 equal slices or whatnot. And that's reminiscent of the 12 zodiacal paths of the tree of life in Kabbalah. Or if you have a familiarity with astrology, and this is what kind of stuck out to me, um, it made me think of the horoscope of astrology, say a natal chart, for example, another word for a natal chart, and how that chart, how the horoscope is divided into 12 sections. And when you think about, say, a natal chart or the horoscope in astrology, how that kind of maps out, or it's seen as a map of one's inner self. And it's really interesting how the sun in this particular deck represents self. So I thought that was very fascinating. So that's one way to look at the wheel as well, and the colors in that wheel. And as we continue on, you've probably also noticed the eyes around the wheel. And the eyes in this representation, they harken back to one of our previous cards. They're similar to the, actually, let me go back a little bit. It harkens back to the Chariot card, um, and the Chariot card draws on some of the same biblical imagery that those eyes represent. The eyes in this deck, or the eyes in this particular card, are representative of the visions that Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, had um, in, I guess, the book of Ezekiel. The book of Ezekiel, and that might be getting a little too into um, biblical symbolism. But if you're curious about what the eyes represent, based on the source material, that was Robert Wang's um, interpretation, or rather, that was the meaning behind including the eyes. Um, just sort of a very fascinating, vivid, prophetic image, and I can probably get more into that as I continue, if I don't run out of time here. And finally, you probably also noticed the four candles at the in the foreground, the four candles kind of at the bottom of the card, and those four candles have a representation of the relationship of the circular figure, the 4 points of. Oh, let me go back to my notes again. Represent the relationship of the circular figure, representation of the square, not the square, representation of the circle, to the 4 points of the square. Now, there is the concept that Robert Wang wanted to express, the Jungian concept of squaring the circle. And based on the source material, those four candles at the bottom kind of harken back to the idea of circling the square, or squaring the circle rather. And the idea of squaring the circle is an idea of God within man. The square in the circle is the man within God. And I think what I'm going to do is, as I'm kind of going through each card, each of these videos will focus on the card itself, but I would like to do, at the end of, once I've gotten to the end of this, maybe a longer form video that touches on each of the cards and how they connect overall, how they tell a sort of major arcana story. So if it sounds like I'm all over the place, I do apologize for that. I'm trying to adhere to the notes, and this particular card is very rich with a lot of symbolism, I think. It's a very fascinating card. So I'm going to just scroll back through some of my notes here. Let's see here. Actually, I think I'm running a little low on time. Let's see. Wheel of Fortune, of course, representing the ups and the downs. And the Wheel of Fortune is a recurring figure in medieval art. Of course, medieval art, medieval life has come to inform a lot of the tarot imagery that has shown up in the more classical decks. Of course, as time goes on, the images of the tarot cards, they shift to reflect more of modern life. But of course, the themes of earlier cards tend to be heavily driven on medieval art and the themes of medieval life. And as tarot evolved, it continues to see. Actually, let me go back a little bit. There have been, let's see, the the inclusion of Lady Fortune, I think, actually is inspired by, informed by the philosopher Boethius. And I actually downloaded the work of Boethius, a very fascinating paper, The Consolation of Philosophy, which concerns the true nature of fortune. And I haven't read it yet, but I was very fascinated. I was looking up materials that could give me a little more information about the origins of the Wheel of Fortune card. And Boethius's work, I hope I'm saying his name right, The Consolation of Philosophy came up. And based on the source material of this particular deck, I think Boethius's work really inspired the use of a female fortune figure. Um, Unlike, say, the Rider Waite Smith deck, or rather the Rider Waite Smith card, if you'll remember, there's the image of the Sphinx with the scepter, and um, the other creature is just kind of moving along the wheel, up and down the wheel. And those creatures themselves represent just kind of the changes in fortune. You know, sometimes you're moving up the wheel, sometimes you're moving down. But I do intend to read Boethius's work, as that appears to inform this particular card. Let's see, how much more time do I have? Um, and of course, the will itself, um, that is pretty significant in that the wheel, of course, the circular shape is also a mandala shape, rather. The circle itself is an archetypal figure. It can, let's see. Oh, sorry for the pauses. I am going through my notes here. We have the mandala, the circular figure that encompasses, protects, and defends the psychic personality against outside influences, and it seeks to unite the inner opposites. Now, that's kind of a direct quote from the material, but when you think of the figure of the original man, the central figure of the wheel, you can kind of think about how that figure, you know, that the original man is protected by the mandala, is within that mandala, and perhaps being within that space is where that particular figure, where the original man is being controlled by the forces of fortune, and the way that fortune maneuvers the wheel around is what's shaping the man's self. And I think that is the end of my meditation there. Yeah, I think I will do a further deeper dive once I've come to the end of the major arcana cards there. And I hope that my ramblings were at least slightly insightful. So I found this to be a very interesting card. Maybe I should have made this just a little bit longer so I can incorporate everything that I've been learning about the card. But mostly, I think this is an exercise so that you can kind of take in the card, allow it to speak to you. And if this speaks to you at all, please give a like. And until I see you again, this has been Karmic Fixer Tarot with our Jungian Deck study.